And welcome back, adventurers, to Let's Play ChäoS. In the last episode, we observed the Route AA ending, in which Rimi Sakihata, despite her conviction, in the end chose not to erase the life of Takumi Nishijo, instead choosing for him to live. And as a result, the original Takumi Nishijo, aka Shogun, well, his lifespan is no more. But for both Rimi and Takumi, they were able to create a shared recognition of a blue sky over the ruined and shattered Shibuya. Now this is going to be the final episode of Let's Play ChäoS, in which we observe the Route B ending. Route B not being obtainable unless we'd actually finished the game once. And the reason you're seeing this finale episode early is because there was supposed to be a bad ending that I was going to be featuring before this, which can supposedly, according to the guide I've been looking up, can only be obtained at the end of Chapter 6, Noah. The point where Takumi is being held hostage and being coerced by Detective Mamoru Suwa under the guise of Count Darth Spider in an effort to try and get him to awaken to his gigolomaniac powers. Now at a certain point at that moment, Takumi was supposed to have a delusion trigger choice, but he wasn't actually supposed to have a delusion, which would have led to a situation which ultimately should have obtained a bad ending, or the bad ending, since there was only one in all of ChäoS. Unfortunately, I think because I've completed ChäoS already, it is virtually impossible for me to obtain the bad ending. So as a result, I apologize for that, but it is really a minor thing. Now, on to the final ending of this final episode of Let's Play ChäoS, which is the Route B ending. As I said before, it is only obtainable on a second playthrough of ChäoS, of which I'm currently doing a Let's Play. With that said, ChäoS Route B ending is very specific, in that it relies on making very specific choices at 11 of the various delusion trigger situation points throughout the story. And I'm going to show when those particular moments of causality take place, skipping ahead through all 11 points, and then we shall see what the Route B ending actually entails. So without further ado, we shall jump ahead to the first of the 11 necessary delusion triggers. Alright, so this is the first delusion trigger, and believe it or not, the way to first order of business is actually not to select anything very specific. So at this point, it's important not to actually choose either delusion. On to the second delusion trigger. Here is the second important delusion trigger, all the way in Chapter 2 during Fez's live concert performance. And my guide is correct. We need to select the left trigger, which is the green one on the left-hand corner. The third delusion trigger is the point where Takumi thinks that, or thinks to himself that Nightheart might actually be self-aware, that is his Ensu avatar on the screen. And like the second, the second important delusion, we're going to choose the left foremost trigger. I think that's it for Chapter 2. I will see you all in Chapter 3. Now we're at the Chapter 3 delusion trigger. Fortunately, this is the only delusion trigger on Chapter 3. The moment where Takumi remembers the mysterious phone number. And for this one, we need to select the right trigger at this point in time. I'm actually going to jump ahead because the next delusion trigger that we need is all the way in Chapter 5, so we can just skip Chapter 4 completely. So I shall see you all in just a moment. Alright, that took a bit longer than I thought it was going to, but we finally made it to Chapter 5, and the next delusion trigger. I should probably keep track of what these are, so okay, according to the guide, this is the 20th trigger, and luckily there are only 2 triggers in Chapter 5. The next one is a little while away, but just need to recheck my guide again. One moment. Okay, it was as I thought. So this one here, first trigger of Chapter 5, is the left trigger. There we go, and we can skip ahead to the next trigger, which is the 24th trigger. So one moment. Alright, we've reached the second important delusion trigger of Chapter 5, which is trigger 24. Meeting Kozue by the shoeboxes, and the moment where Rimi covers Takumi's eyes. We need to select the right delusion trigger. Of course, I won't. Not only will I not be showing you the ones that I've already shown you, if you've already been following this LP thus far, but I should also mention that I'm not going to be showing any delusion triggers that I missed from Chapter 6 onwards, because I want to wrap this up as quickly as possible. And speaking of Chapter 6, that is where the next important delusion trigger for Route B is, so I shall see you all at that point. Alright, we're now at the next important delusion trigger for Chapter 6, and this is actually trigger 25. The last one was the previous one at trigger 24. Yeah, once again reiterate, there are about over 40 delusion triggers, and yeah, only certain ones that are important. Anyway, this is the point where Shogun returns in the Ensu chat room. Although I think at this point it's either Takumi Nishijo or most likely Detective Suwa pretending to be Shogun. But actually, just give me one more moment just to recheck my guide. A little bit paranoid here since I can't save in Chapter 6. Just making sure this one is the left trigger. I think this is important trigger number 7. One moment. Yeah, this was the 7th important delusion trigger for the Route B ending. And speaking of number 7, the next I think 3 delusion triggers are all the way in Chapter 7, so I shall see you all at those points in Chapter 7. And now we're at Trigger 30 in Chapter 7. The point where Takumi wakes up and finds Nurse Hazuki standing there. And actually, let me just recheck my guide. No, it's the right trigger. And also, I should mention that yeah, there are only 2 important delusion chapters, delusion triggers in this chapter. Not 3. So, thought I'd correct that. Alright, important trigger number 9. The point where Kozue and Sena and Takumi are busy eating ice creams in the street. And, yeah, just making sure that my decision was the right one. So this one, number 9, is the right trigger. Now on to the next one, which is all the way in Chapter 8. Okay, we've reached delusion trigger number 10 that we need to pick. And just making sure of something. Yes, indeed. Just double checking the guide here. And number 10 is the right trigger. There we go. So now all that's left, hopefully, is to jump ahead to the final 11th important delusion trigger, which is all the way in Chapter 9. So I shall see you all soon. Alright, we've reached the 11th and final important delusion trigger for getting the rupee ending. The moment where Takumi hears Nanami's voice after chatting with Grim in Chapter 9. And I did check this time. It is we need to select the left-hand trigger. There we go. And that should be all of them. All 11 delusion triggers that I've selected in total. So we'll jump ahead to the ending in Chapter 10 and see whether or not I've actually reached the rupee ending. Hopefully I have, or else all of this would have been for nothing. So I will see you all shortly. Okay, so I think we've actually achieved the rupee ending, it seems. Because something has happened a bit earlier than I would have expected. We've reached the point where Sena and Kozue are busy wandering through the tunnel in search of Issei Hatano, the man to the left. But as you can see, he is not alone. There are 2 human figures standing at the back of the dim platform. First is Issei Hatano, and the second is Genichi Norose, which this didn't happen before, so I think Genichi's presence here is a surefire sign that I have in fact achieved the rupee ending. Now let's see how this particular encounter plays out. One was a tall man wearing a high-quality suit. From head to toe he gave off an aura of refinement. He had excellent posture, and a relaxed smile played about his lips. Interesting that you should be here instead of holed up in your corporate headquarters, Genichi. The other was a homeless man clad in filthy clothing. His hair was overly long and his face had been left unshaven. Since he had his head lowered, it was impossible to be certain of his expression. Of course, we can definitely make out his expression. A man who has literally lost everything in his life. The two of them had overly contrasting appearances. All they did was stand quietly in the dark station platform where there were no other people. To Sena, both of them were objects of hatred. Genichi Norose and Issei Hatano. Even if she wanted to forget them, she wouldn't have been able to.
母さんと妹を殺した。その二人が揃ってお出迎えか。
Sena has not forgotten the terrible tragedy that took the life of her mother and younger sister. In the past, her mother and little sister had met with a gruesome end before her eyes, and these people themselves were the culprits who had killed Sena's family. To be fair, it was Genichi who deliberately ordered the end of the prototype Noah 2 experiment. But then again, it was Issei Hatano that allowed the two of them to be involved in said experiment.
私の本意ではなかったんだ、セナ。
Be that as it may, Issei Hatano, and it is true, Sena does not care one way or the other. Not now. The homeless man, Hatano, murmured desolately, his head hanging.
あの実験を止めようとした。だが、私一人では動き出した歯車は止められなかった。
And he's been living with the chains of his guilt ever since.
この男が。
Hatano took a darting glance at Norose's countenance. Norose said nothing. His attitude of being utterly at ease remained impeccable.
この男が実験の継続を指示した。私はあの結果を望んではいなかった。悪いのはこの男、ノロセなんだ。
And yet, sadly, part of the blame does rest with you, we say.
分かってくれ、セナ。
And of course, you are aware that there is no forgiveness. Not for you. Sena felt revolted as she listened to his words of repentance.
お前は母さんと妹を見殺しにした。
If by stood by and watched you mean helplessly restrained by Genichi's bodyguards, then yes.
それが厳然とした事実だ。悔いているならどうして逃げた？
Because there was no way to undo what had already been done.
世界を守るためだ。
でたらめを。
親に逆らうのは感心しませんね。
Finally, Genichi intervenes. There, for the first time, Norose spoke.
確かに君の家族が悲劇的な結末を迎えたのは 私が指示した結果です。
Not that you care one way or the other, you miserable bastard.
もう十分データは取れていたのでね。実に有意義な実験でした。
有意義？
She swiftly rebooted the D-sword in her hand. The shock wave from it stirred her long dark hair. And yet Genichi is not afraid in the slightest. But then again, if you watch the previous episode, if you watch 2 episodes ago, or more besides, you actually know what Genichi Norose is capable of, even without Noah 2.
この男を殺せセナ。こいつが元凶だ。
Indeed he is. Unfortunately, well, actually, no, never mind. I had a thought, but I'll put it aside for now. In any event, it's not going to be that easy for Sena to kill Genichi.
言われなくても
Sena had already leapt powerfully from the platform floor. She had closed the distance without brandishing her sword, a wondrous demonstration of springing into motion from a standstill. Her target was Genichi Norose. She mowed him down with her D-sword. Slicing apart even the air, his head went flying. Sena followed it with her eyes. Norose's soaring head abruptly warped mid-air. She watched it transform into her own father's face. Oh dear. It seems as though Genichi Norose has done to Sena what he will eventually do to his quote-unquote colleagues over at Nozomi, the member of the Meiwa Party and the head of the Church of Divine Light. That is to say, inputting negative particles into their dead spots and making them kill each other while making them think they were killing him. In other words, Sena Aoi was manipulated by Genichi and Noah too. Shocked, she looked at the headless body before her. Probably should have realized that something was so incredibly suspect. Genichi would not have put himself out in the open if he didn't have a bag of tricks up his sleeve. And even then, actually saying that, thought has occurred to me that maybe Genichi isn't actually here in person after all. Maybe he has just protected himself via Noah too. It had been wearing a suit a second before, but now it was in a homeless person's tattered clothes. Powerless, it went toppling over backward. Eyes wide, Sena moved her gaze to Hatano, who had been standing beside it. Except that isn't Hatano. He, in turn, faced her as well. His bearded mouth had on a mocking smile. His face contorted as though a mosaic had been laid over it. His body contorted too. The next instant, Hatano had assumed the face of a man Sena didn't know. You. Well, it turns out that Mamoru Suwa is in fact more skilled at using Noa2 than I thought. I was wondering where when you were going to show up. In age, countenance, and demeanor, he had a completely different person. Well, he was a completely different person from her father. Sena was bewildered. She took another scrutinizing look at the head she had just decapitated. After tracing an arc and falling, it had splattered blood on the floor. It was her father's face, her father's head. Sena couldn't tear her eyes away from it. Bewitchment brought about by a delusion. As she came to that realization, Sena's breathing went fast and shallow.
セナちゃんさ、
The man who was previously supposed to have been her father, who was now a separate person, called Sena's name in an intimate tone.
君が今やったことって結局お父さんと同じっすよね。
I refuse to be judged by a miserable piece of shit just like yourself, Mamoru. It was a result she'd longed for these past 6 months, except she hadn't achieved it in the way that she wanted. It should have been. Despite that, Sena was assaulted by uncertainty. Her father, now only ahead, had his eyes turned in Sena's direction.
父親の首跳ねて殺すってえぐいな。
父さん。
The first time. The first time that Sena has ever referred to Issei Hatano that way. Why was she experiencing this much psychological shock? Still not understanding the reason behind it, Sena heard the sound of something tearing apart with a snap deep in her ears. Oh dear. And we're back with Takumi again, and it looks like this might not be over quite so soon. It was the scream in Sena's heart. Upon hearing that cry, which resembled madness and seemed to curse reality, I came running to Shinsen Station. By then, it was already too late. When I entered the dim premise, the faint smell of blood hovered in the air. Kosuke was lying down by the wall unconscious, and on the platform, there was Sena's form, sunken down, her back facing me. Tragedy is struck. Her head was lowered, making her long hair cover her face, keeping me from seeing her expression. Next to her was the headless body. The round object lying fallen a short distance away was the head that had once been connected to the corpse, I realized. Hatano-san. Becoming aware that it was him, I bit my lip.
こいつはラッキーっすね。
The lone man stood on the tracks. Though he was in a suit, he also wore a rucksack, and from within it reverberated a nasty mechanical noise. The Noa2 terminal. Mamoru Suwa. A detective in the investigative department at police headquarters. I had met this man before, and I knew what this man had done. And I'm just probably going to skip ahead the bits that we have already seen, so give me a moment, adventurers. Okay, so there is going to be a bit of difference to Suwa's conversation with Takumi here.
西条くんさ、口の利き方に気をつけてほしいっすね。自分の方が年上っすよ。
Without taking my eyes off Suwa, I cautiously jumped down jumped from the platform down the tracks. It ended up so that I was shielding the motionless Sena with my back.
アンっていう人を殺したのはあんただ。
Yes, indeed, you were the one who murdered your own superior and elder, so I don't want to hear any bitching from you about this whole seniority thing.
だから、
刑事のくせに人を殺すなんて。
君には言われたくないっす。
And I would rather not hear it from you, you disciple of the Divine Church of Light. I clenched my D-sword tightly.
あんたみたいなやつに敬語を使う義理なんてないよ。
Very well said, Takumi.
あのさ、お前に言われたくねえって言ってるんだよ。
And I'm saying I don't want to hear it from you, and there is Suwa's true nature exposing itself. I could tell clearly, even from this distance. Well, the smile had disappeared from his face, replaced by an even more rancid expression.
お前も人殺しだろ。
And pray tell, how does that logic work?
違うとは言わせないぞ。お前は葉月志乃を殺した。俺は今すぐにでもお前をぶち殺したいんだよ。
That name. Shino Hazuki. The nurse who had been the true New Gen criminal. The two of them were fellow disciples in the Church of God's Light. Yeah, like the Dark Lords of the Sith, there were two New Gen criminals. Shino Hazuki, aka Grim, and Mamoru Suwa, aka Count Darth Spider. Together, the two of them collaborated in the New Gen madness. I believe Suwa was involved in the odd-numbered crimes, whereas Hazuki was involved in the even-number crimes. Was that all there was to it? Perhaps there is more of a connection between Suwa and Hazuki than we previously understood. I gulped down a breath. Even so, Takumi didn't kill Hazuki. She murdered herself with her own scalpel. She took her own life.
信仰の救いのためにそれは自制するが、その代わり。
You know, I think the order from Silent Hill has a place for you. You should go there. You should go there now.
俺が責任持って心を殺してやる。
And please. I immediately started to brandish my D-sword. Nothing was going to come of brandishing it, though. I'd simply done it on reflex, and just as expected, it didn't make any difference. All of a sudden, an astoundingly powerful wind blew at me. Okay, new trick. He's, well, pushed back by it, I almost fell over, so I desperately braced myself. Yeah. Even though we should technically be still standing on the station, Suwa has magically recreated the roof of the O-front building, where we encountered each other before, back in at the end of chapter 6. My body didn't go through with it, and instead I curled up in a ball on the spot. I couldn't control my own body. It moved by itself, like it didn't belong to me. Before I knew it, my surroundings had gone dark. Below me was a nighttime vista that one might easily mistake for a field of stars. I came to the realization I was standing somewhere incredibly high up. And you should remember this place. Beside me were 4 guys and girls I'd never met. No, I'd seen one of them before. Yua. For some reason, she wasn't wearing her glasses. And, just going back to the fact that I mentioned that Suwa and Hazuki were working in tandem of the new gen crimes. I frickin' called it. Mamoru Suwa was involved in the first new gen crime, as well as the other odd-numbered crimes. So in other words, Mamoru Suwa was responsible for the death of Miya Kusanoki. Who isn't Yua? She was Miya, Yua's younger twin sister who should have died a month ago. And did. In other words, this was the roof of Cornelius Tower. Though not the O-front building. My mistake. My body wasn't my own. I was wearing an unfamiliar school uniform. Even my stature was more brawny. Ah, so Suwa is making Takumi believe that he is one of the 5 people involved in the group dive case. To begin with, I could guess who I was based on the fact that there were only 4 other guys and girls near me, crumpled down, petrified and wailing and crying. This body into which my consciousness had climbed, or maybe not. Yeah, I was right. It belonged to one of the 5 victims who had died in the first New Gen case, the group dive. Without my will having any bearing on it, my field of sight slowly moved. It slid to the side. I turned back to the heliport. Shogun, who had filmed that video, must be there. But then again, appearances are deceiving, Takumi Nishijo. And in fact, come to think of it, it is now rather strange that, knowing what I do now, that the original Takumi Nishijo referred to himself as Shogun to begin with. Now that we know that the person behind the mask was actually Suwa himself. Shogun wore a Count Dart's spider on his helmet on his head, and a black cloak over his body. The Shogun who had cornered me at O-Front had put on a similar getup. And this would explain the greeting during the initial encounter with Shogun. Remember that Grimm said the words, greeting Shogun? Yeah. But was he really Shogun? Yes, he is. No matter how I looked at it, his legs, sticking out slightly from beneath the black cloak, were clad in slacks. My pet theory is that the original Takumi Nishijo took the moniker that Suwa had given himself and had used that to try and propel Takumi along with his awakening, knowing that it was the only way for him to actually have a chance against Genichi and Noah too. But I digress. On top of that, they were as thick as those of a regular adult male. They weren't the skinny, pitiful legs of Shogun, of Takumi Nishijo, whose bones protruded visibly. Looking more closely, even his seated height was totally different. The cloak had kept them hidden, but his shoulders also appeared fairly broad. At the very least, it wasn't Takumi Nishijo. Nor was he carrying a video camera. Moreover, from the darkness spreading out at the fake shogun's back, I heard dragging footsteps. And not just one set of them. It wasn't a hallucination. Those peculiar footsteps belonged to many, many people. It meant that several dozen somethings were lurking beyond the darkness. These footsteps hadn't been a part of the video uploaded on YouTube. Besides, there was no way such a large number of people could have accessed this heliport. What the hell was the source of the sound? The four others next to me screamed and wept in lamentation. Disregarding my will, my body too let out a cry and began shaking. It's all finally starting to reveal itself, ladies and gentlemen. Something was approaching. Yeah. Suwa was using Noah 2 to manipulate the psyches of the 5 unfortunate students. Which explains why they were so incredibly terrified. Projecting night terrors into their dead spots. Continuing Genichi Norose's twisted experiments on other people. We're finally seeing the events of the new gen crimes firsthand. This is definitely unnerving. They only had one escape. I wonder if the crowd are actually delusions or other Nozomi porters also went on this. Probably delusions, since this wasn't captured. Yet there is a voice. Takumi Nishijo, the real one. Shogun
そ
was
の目
involved.
誰に？
Curious. Ah. I see what's happened. Oh dear. With that, all five slammed into the ground. So Shogun tried to save them, but it didn't quite work. Didn't quite go to plan. Pain of it grabbed hold of me without my expecting it. That single blow leading straight to death. Its impact made it seem like my entire body had exploded and been ground down to a fine powder from the inside out. I'd experienced the sensation of my heart contracting violently from the shock of it. And my consciousness ended there, or cut off there. My eyes were coercively made to open, and the scenery that flew into my vision without my consent. I was walking along Tamagawa Street. My body was completely intact. Even though the previous sensation of colliding with the ground lingered distinctly within me, I was walking normally down the street, not that what I willed had anything to do with it. This body too was sturdier than mine. This wasn't me, either. I had a nasty premonition. Suddenly there was a strange man walking toward me. When I saw him, I was forced to acknowledge that my hunch had been right on the money. The man I passed was clothed in a suit, but for some reason he wore a Darth Spider helmet on his head. The image he made was much too surreal. There were no other passers-by. I wanted to flee from here this very second. Despite that, the owner of the body my consciousness had come into had turned back towards the Darth Spider man I'd just passed. Darth Spider was standing right behind me, so close it seemed like I could feel his breath. Coming from my blind spot, he socked me in the stomach. All the tension dropped out of my body and my vision went pitch black. After some time, I felt a searing pain in my abdomen. When my field of sight opened again, I was in an operating room. Before me stood Shino Hazuki, Her nurse's whites open, her stomach bloody. Though she was deathly pale, she gave me a kind smile. Oh dear. Okay, so my hunch wasn't entirely on the money. Looks like Hazuki and Suwa were both helping each other out in all of the new gen crimes. In her hand was a scalpel. She slowly laid it against my belly. Yeah, we've moved from the first crime to the second. Hazuki's hand pressed down. A rift appeared in my skin. Blood sprayed from the wound, catching on Shino Hazuki's face. Even then, her smile remained pasted on. I watched, overwhelmed by dread and pain, as she gradually slashed me open. I've viewed this spectacle once before when I read Hazuki's memories. In short, this was the pregnant man incident, case number 2. Pain in my stomach was becoming unbearable. Screaming and crying, I tried to somehow escape by squirming, but my limbs were tied down to the bed and I couldn't move away. Shaking myself made the pain in my abdomen grow still more intense.
信仰の救いをあなたに。
There we go. We are now experiencing the second case from the victim's perspective, same as the first. So this is the punishment that Mamoru Suwa is now inflicting upon Takumi Nishijo. And I doubt this ordeal is going to be over anytime soon, because there were 7 cases. We've only experienced the first 2. This is probably going to take a while. And that doesn't bode well, especially for Takumi. Now, of course, the reason I'm not reading this out is part of it is too hard to see with the panorama in the background, and also it's going too fast for me to read, and also parts of it are cut off from the screen, as you can see. I think everyone in the Church of Divine Light can be described as insane. Yet again, Shino Hazuki living up to a moniker of grim.
よく我慢できましたね。
Yeah. Suwa and Hazuki were working in tandem, which reminds me of the moment where Hazuki initially kept Suwa from reading Takumi Nishijo's private file. I think that was a front that the two of them were putting on for show. Ah, so basically Suwa finished what Hazuki started. How very unfortunate. Itchy. Almost reminds me of the Keeper's Diary from Resident Evil. Because of my mental state, took me a while to notice that the scenery had switched at some point, and I'm actually going to take a break, but at this point, because we're almost an hour in the route to this particular episode. Things are playing out quite differently in Route B. And looks like this Let's Play isn't over just yet, adventurers, but well, you know what? I think I am actually going to maybe continue this episode, unless it takes too long, because, well, we're only up to case 3 of 7. There is still a lot more that we have to endure from Mamoru Suwa. So, actually, you know what? Yeah, I am going to end this episode of Let's Play ChäoS Head here, and when we return, we still have the other new gen cases to look forward to. Joy. Well, as always, adventurers, until next we meet, I guess.